Hello and welcome everybody to That's a Data Problem. My name is Daniel Newman, Principal Analyst and Founding Partner at Futurum Research and your host for this series. Today I'm excited to be welcomed by Teresa Carlson, President and Chief Growth Officer at Splunk, who will be joining me to talk all about cloud strategy for customer success. Teresa, how are you doing?
Hi, Daniel. How are you doing? Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, very excited to have you here. Welcome to the show. Done several of these. Really excited for today's conversation. And excited to have you here. You are new to Splunk, just recently joining after quite a tenure, a lot of background in cloud. And I'm not going to steal any of your thunder and let you share that. But before I do jump in and talk about cloud success and customer success, why don't you introduce yourself, tell everyone a little bit about your background, and of course, how you ended up here at Splunk in this exciting role.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. Yes, I'm on my 9th week here at Splunk. It's gone really fast, and I didn't take a break, so I left Amazon the middle end of April and started the next Monday here, which was exciting. And I spent the last almost 11 years at Amazon Web Services, initially building our public sector business, Daniel. And then from there, I also picked up our regulated industry business units. So that was a lot of fun, building a cloud computing business from scratch. In the early days of 2010, when I started there, literally no one knew what cloud was. I used to laugh and say we would go to Capitol Hill, and when I would walk in, they would want to know if I was there to talk about books. And I was like, no, I'm here to talk about cloud. And they really didn't understand what cloud was as early as 2010. So fast forward today, and for sure people understand what cloud computing is. And that business grew from really nothing to billions of dollars in less than 10 years. And we were able to change policies and acquisition models and really help the customers with what they needed to do to make that massive transition from an on-prem model to a cloud-based model.
Yeah, it is a big transition. And before you were, leading that business unit at AWS, you had a pretty significant role at Microsoft as well. So, you look around who are the who's who of cloud right now, and you've been with it even before it was really something to be with. So
yeah, when I was at Microsoft, I was there for almost 10 years running their U.S. federal government business. And the last 2 or 3 years I was there, from like 2007 to 2010, they were developing BPOS. That was the early days of the Office 365. And we were just testing it out with a lot of the U.S. government customers. And from there, they were in the works of doing Azure, early days of Azure. And it was so interesting, Daniel, because when I came over to AWS, the one thing that I recognized was what a unbelievable space and period that AWS had almost a 6-year head start in really thinking and developing cloud computing. And it was interesting being at a company that had been an on-premise, server type company and coming to one that they only thought of cloud. It was totally 100% everything cloud native. So you really disrupt your own thinking. For me, it was a very different type of companies to come into. And now I'm able to bring that experience into Splunk.
Yeah, it is very interesting. It's also been interesting to watch sort of this pendulum swing, right? You went from almost all prem at Microsoft to all cloud at AWS. And then over the last couple of years, especially the last, I'd say 3 years or so, we've seen that pendulum swing right back towards the middle where, we're seeing that there is no one answer. It's not all cloud and it's not going to be all prem. It's going to be a hybrid model. And all the companies have definitely addressed this. Now, I'd love to talk about, your decision to come to Splunk and obviously how you intend to take all this experience. Because Splunk, by the way, is in this massive transition, right? It completely flipped its business model. It completely changed its approach from prem to cloud. I have to imagine that when you were in the interviewing process, when Doug and the board decided to add you into the leadership team, that there had to be some consensus that you were really going to be able to help steer this next wave of growth in the cloud, Splunk cloud. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I have known Doug Merritt for a long time. I really admire him. And Splunk I've known for a really long time because they were one of our top partners at Amazon Web Services. And interestingly enough, Daniel, when I actually transitioned out of AWS, I did about 85 customer calls to transition to Max Peterson, who took my public sector business at AWS. And over 90% of the customers were like, oh, yeah, we're Splunk users. Like, call us again when you're back over there. So it was really fun for me to see how many of the customers that I talked to in the transition were actually Splunk customers. So here's the thing about Splunk that's very interesting. Customers love Splunk. Prior to me coming here on the leadership team, it was very clear that Splunk was a key go-to technology for customers in understanding what was happening with their IT, their infrastructure, really understanding their metrics and what was happening. And knowing where they were in their journey was actually pretty exciting for me. So we are seeing a massive growth. And, like anything else with cloud, I always told everybody, in my 11 years almost at AWS, it's a very kind of lumpy business because of customers' journey, not because they like or don't like a technology. It's lumpy because customers, when they're making this decision. And one of the areas that I felt like I could bring to the table was helping the customer move a bit faster on that decision and understanding those decision cycles and points with customers in moving to the cloud. And you are right, customers definitely have changed, like from the 100% on-prem world to now they were really moving fast to the cloud, still are like crazy, but now they've said, what is the right model from a hybrid? And what we've tended to see now is a lot of edge computing capabilities, which are super interesting, where customers want their technology on demand wherever they are and whatever environment they're in. And that is because of data. And if you think about Splunk, they are the most exciting company out there today, I think, in the world of data and what they're able to do. So for me, Daniel, it was a really easy choice. I had been there almost 11 years, and looking at this leadership opportunity for me was amazing to really come over and help Splunk complete that journey to the cloud and work with our customers in new and different ways so they could understand how to take advantage of those capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And Splunk has seen some pretty impressive rates of growth as I've tracked everything from the last presentation that Doug Merritt gave at Conf to just their quarterly earnings. The overall growth rates have been impressive, just looking at them side by side, especially in terms of its cloud and ARR growth against the likes of the ServiceNows and the Salesforces and companies that have really been benchmark growth companies. And you coming in with that Chief Growth Officer title, you're going to be accountable for keeping that foot on the pedal, keeping it accelerating. So, let's get back to the macro a little bit here, Teresa. Part of what you bring to having been at AWS and coming in here is just such visibility into customers' challenges, right? You kind of started to allude to what the customer wants, what the customer needs. I still remember and countless conversations listening to Andy Jassy talking about sort of success is about meeting the customer where they are. I mean, he's one of the first that said that, like where it kind of became it's become a bit of a quotable at this point by a lot of different executives. But you're hearing the challenges, you're seeing the challenges. What are the business challenges that you right now are seeing customers face that are really, going to support the growth that you're here to develop?
Well, it's interesting because enterprise customers, they really have to consider what are their business goals. And I couldn't agree with Andy more. It was one of the things I always loved about Amazon. Jeff had set the customer obsession as it was the number one leadership principle. And I tell everybody, it's amazing what happens when you listen to your customers and you innovate on behalf of your customer, because they will tell you what they need. You just have to listen. And then you have to make sure that you're delivering that and really helping them on that customer journey. And cloud is not for the faint of heart. They are making a cultural shift when they go and make the move to cloud. And systems are complicated. Data is everywhere. And the one thing for sure that cloud computing has done is help decomplexify what they're doing. Their ability to have situational and awareness at every level, the ability to consume, process, store, and analyze massive amounts of data like we never dreamed. And if you think of even the concept of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we started talking about machine learning years ago, years and years, and there's been different iterations of people actually trying to make it successful. But today, if you really pull back the covers, why is it successful? Because of cloud computing. That ability in a very frugal way to be able to store, process, and analyze that information. And with Splunk, in terms of data, that becomes more meaningful. And I'll just kind of share an example, Daniel. If you think about during COVID, the amount of ransomware and cyber attacks that happened. And, I've worked with governments now for 20 plus years around the world. And my own personal experience was the last 18 to 24 months. It was a barrage into the customer of how they were being attacked. And I think there were a few things that happened. One, COVID just allowed more exploitation because of people not being able to get into their data centers, not being able to secure those sites, really not being able to have that discipline that they even generally had with management. It just became a really even more deeply challenging problem. And while there's so many tools and technologies out there today, cloud computing being one of the top, to understand what's happening with your environment, with Splunk, using the metrics and the logging of everything to understand what even happened after, to understand and be able to protect the enterprise. And, I used to tell customers, hey, the number one thing you can do is back up your data in the cloud. Because a lot of the organizations and companies didn't even have backup. So just understanding, having that duplicate of your information and data when it gets locked down in a different location. But really the challenges and the cultural shift that customers have gone through to understand how the exploitation has changed, how the threat and attack vectors have changed. And that is the reason you need to have a really secured system in place, along with all the tools and technologies like Splunk, that allows you to understand what happened, what's going on, and how do I change my behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to build on that real quick, because I'd like to kind of give you a two-part approach, two-part question here. You sort of mentioned what the complexity is. You've kind of mentioned how we've gotten here. But for organizations, there's value. There's a return that comes with being able to tackle this complexity. But there's kind of two pieces here. One, if an organization is able to tackle this complexity, what do you think it means for their business? And I immediately start to think about, you can pick something like storage, but it's not just storage. It's when they learn how to do this,
yeah.
They learn how to do it for many parts of their business. But then how do they do it? Like, that's one thing I'd love to get from you, because you've seen it for that past decade plus that you were there. You've watched companies come to you and say, we want to do this, or federal organizations or SLED, state, or, we want to do this, but we don't know how. How do they do it? So part A is, if they're able to tackle it, what's the benefit? And part B, how'd you get them there?
Well, it's kind of a cliche, but I'll say it. It really is people, process, technology, and culture. And culture encompasses this, Daniel, like no other piece, because there are always antibodies against change. It was the biggest lesson I've learned over the last 11 years, is that I thought, I did all this at Microsoft. I'll walk over to AWS and I'll be able to take those same customers and drive change. And the same at Splunk. What I'm trying to do at Splunk is be much more realistic about, and with taking all the knowledge and understanding of what customers are actually going through. And the first thing is, inside an organization, they will always ask, for the economics of why they make the change. And they will also ask how it makes their business or organization more agile and fast so they can compete, whatever that competition is. And if you think about the idea of the economics, what customers go through, and we had to go through this previously, we'll have to go through it at Splunk, is when is the right time to make that change? And let me give you one example. If a customer just did a hardware refresh and you're asking them to make a move to the cloud, they'll show me, well, what's the return? How am I going to understand that? And then the second piece is I've found over the years, customers do not understand it's an apples to oranges. They have to take their entire cost and look at it, because when you make a move to the cloud, you have to understand what's, you're not going to be replacing servers. You're not doing that patching. You're not going to actually pay, for what's the utility bill? How does that change? What's the people cost change? So you have to really understand the full picture of really what that cost structure is. And then you have to make sure that your people are trained. And I saw organizations go through massive change in terms of training with education. One of the programs that I launched that I'm so excited to continue at Splunk was education and training across the world to make sure that people had access to cloud computing certifications, because you have to understand the model of cloud and teach and train it. And we found often that universities were not teaching the latest and greatest models on coding and development and analyzing, because they've moved up the stack. Employees have moved up the stack. They're no longer moving a server from here to there. They're actually analyzing and understanding what's happening with their IT infrastructure. They're using that data, those metrics to drive that understanding. So you make the change by, one, sitting down with a customer, really going through, again, listening to them. What are they trying to achieve? 2, giving them the economics. 3, putting a plan in place with them, making sure that they have all the tools and mechanisms in place. Then 4th, putting an educational program in place. And then lots of communication, Daniel. I cannot underestimate with customers during this journey. You really have to over communicate with them. And also let them understand the opportunity, but what are the risks and what do they need to look out for? And then what should they expect in terms of gains? So all these things are important, especially if you're going through, again, that end-to-end transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of sits on the, the narrative that's come to market about, it's all about the data. And well, a lot of people kind of think that's cliche because you use the people, process, tech, and culture. And yes, we've been saying that a long time, but sometimes things become cliches or they become narratives or quotables because they're true.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, well, you want me to say it differently, but actually I'm going to say this because this is the case. And I like that you incorporated culture because I've looked a lot at the kind of the culture of data, or the, creating a data-driven culture, an organization that, gets away from that gut-driven decision that got it to where it might be, but to get where it wants to go next. I mean, the data is overwhelming that in the end, companies that put data to use are outperforming. And, then you layer in machine learning and you layer in, advanced analytics and AI, and they're winning by more. And so these are the parts and pieces that you really are seemingly being able to bring together. And by the way, another thing you did talk about, the education and the universities, and boy, I can't even begin to say how much I agree. First of all, the whole upskilling movement, and of course your former firm has been massive in the 2025 upskilling initiative. I've studied it extensively, but schools are really struggling to keep up and putting more onus on the industry, tech as a whole, not to displace traditional liberal arts and general education, university, and the social and the maturity that young people get by doing that, but to specialize and to be able to do it quickly at scale on demand. And that's what the tech industry really is doing well. And I think you need both. I think you need the ability to be knowledgeable, which is like the modern knowledgeable. And then you need the right partners to help provide that knowledge to the market, to the impassioned students. And we all know that if you learn some of the right languages and you learn the right, there was different eras of this, but you'd be employable at a whole nother level, and the type of income you could make from that is amazing.
It's unbelievable by far. And it's one of the things I got really excited about when I showed up at Splunk, was talking to our education team about how we could continue to take skills that we need to actually build on what I'd done previously. Because if you think about it, to your point, no longer there's a whole bias that's being broken that you have to go to a 4-year program, you have to go to a graduate program. Really, we were seeing young students out of high school and then in community colleges that had unbelievable tech skills, and then they could just build on these are very buildable skills, which I love. And you want to work backwards again from the employee. What skills do they need? And let's make sure that we're helping at the university level or at the business level, like Splunk or at AWS or a Microsoft or a Google. Let's make sure that we are looking at the skills customers need and we're helping build on those. Because to me, in tech, there is nothing like experience. I mean, there is no algorithm for experience. It is like unbelievable when you can get there and get hands-on.
Fill the skills gap is a big notable here. So, as we sort of come towards the end of this conversation, I got time for a couple more questions, and I want to focus them in on a little bit more macro trends. Mm-hmm. First of all, in general, coming out of the pandemic, we're starting to see the light. You're back in the office today. We're getting back on airplanes. Events are starting to be in person again. But I think secular trends will remain for a period. I don't think everything's going to change in perpetuity, but some of these changes will last for a while. Like, what are some of the key trends you're seeing with customers and markets right now?
Well, I'm laughing a little bit, Daniel, because this is the first time I'm in our Virginia office today, and it's really the first time it's opened up. So for you and I were laughing to get on the podcast, I had to get everything I had to get it going again and work with the team. So, remote work, I think, is here to stay for a very long time. I think there'll be a hybrid approach for sure. We're seeing all the tech companies move in this direction. They found, really that it's not hurting their business that much. I can share my business grew a lot when I was leaving AWS. Our business continues to grow a lot here at Splunk, even under all these conditions. So it's really about balance. And we need to learn now even more deeply how to work in a remote setting. Those of us who were in business sales, I travel the world. I travel 60% of the time to different countries to meet my customers. Never really thought of it or called it so much remote work. But once the pandemic hit, it was a different kind of remote work. So I think we need to manage ourselves on screen. We need to manage our teams. We need to learn how to really operate effectively, making sure that we are very customer obsessed. And when are we on site? When are we remote? The other thing that I found out really since I've been at Splunk that I didn't think about so much even when I left AWS was the organizational role changes that are happening as a result of COVID. In that people who were traditionally purely back office tasks are now being given more innovative job roles. They're asking them to do more, to learn more. And I actually think this is a really good thing, Daniel, when it comes to cloud, because if you think about the whole model of DevOps, if you're teaching and training your individuals how to have a really kind of flywheel approach to their own knowledge and skills, that's super important. And it's funny. The other thing you and I already kind of talked about was how you have to lock down your systems and understand, which is the threat, understanding the real threat to your environment. That changed a lot. And I would say the other big one is data. A trend I saw heavily, customers asked so much about their data, they talked about it, but during COVID, data became an even more important element of how they would run and operate their business. And just the pandemic alone, working with government was so eye-opening during COVID, Daniel, because They needed to amass tons of information in real time to create a common operating picture of what was happening. In terms of if you think about where were the hospital beds, where were the respirators, where could I get a test, what were the signs and symptoms, where could you go see a doctor, was I locked down, can I go to the grocery store? And then governments needed to communicate all that information. They needed to figure out how they pulled it all together. And a lot of their systems were not equipped. Even how they communicated with their citizens wasn't well staffed at that point. So they had to really vector. And what they found, if you talk to any government leader, they'll tell you their data became the single most important thing that they needed to mesh up together and really have a deep understanding so they could act quickly.
Yeah, I feel like most people came to the realization that the transformation efforts pre-pandemic were being done far too gradually in pace. And that really didn't matter if it was government or enterprise, even some of the what would be considered digitally born on digital, and it really did take for granted the opportunities and the systems that were available. And we all saw it because we were able to accelerate so much faster when we had to. And it's kind of like anything, in life, we're all a little bit guilty at times of procrastinating. And, if it ain't broken, kind of mentality and businesses that, had depended on a higher stream of foot traffic, never considered the possibility that their stores couldn't open. It just never even occurred to people, what would happen if I couldn't open my store? What happened if people couldn't come inside and buy stuff? What would happen if people couldn't come to the office? Could the company sustain? Yeah. Could it grow? And we saw companies that were able to pivot quick actually grew really fast, and digitally native and born on cloud companies did great. And we saw legacy industries really struggle, but the ones that did find the ability to pivot are going to come out of this 2020 craziness in a better position than they went into it. I'd like to wrap up with sort of a, bring your best advice type of moment here, Teresa. Because, we sort of talked about the people, process, technology, culture that helps companies, adopt and move to cloud. But, from all your experience, do you have any other advice, any great piece of advice that you would give to companies that are really trying to expedite that cloud journey? And I'll add to that, expedite that cloud and modernization journey that we talked about, because as we said, it's not all cloud, but it will be a lot of cloud.
Well, one thing for sure, you cannot fight gravity, and cloud and digital is gravity now. And without it, you won't have a chance as a business. So first of all, you have to have leadership at the top that is driving that digital and cloud strategy. It's got to happen because businesses will be a dinosaur if they don't transform. So that's for sure. And then data is at the core of that. That's another big reason I'm here at Splunk, but I can share data was always the core of the single issue that customers faced, that they need to determine. They have so much data. What do I do with it? How do I get it into the cloud? And then how do I take real advantage of it? Because data for data's sake is not valuable. It's insights and information that they really need from that data. So one, leadership at the top, for sure. Two, your cloud strategy has to center around data and how you take advantage of that. Three, you've got to make sure that you have a plan for your employees to educate themselves and innovate. Let them experiment. Experimentation is one of the most important things you can do in cloud. And guess what? That's what cloud allows you to do, is to experiment and scale. So you can do that on site with so many ways. And other than the other ones we talked about, those are my biggies, Daniel, for getting going fast and keeping that trajectory moving.
I love that, Teresa. Fail fast to succeed sooner. Let your employees experiment. Those are some great pieces of advice. I feel like I've written them in a book somewhere. So Teresa Carlson, I want to say thank you so much for spending some time with me here on That's a Data Problem.